Over the last 4 years, I've often found myself inspired to paint nostalgic things from my childhood that remind me of happy times. In this video, I'll talk you through my process for creating this specific piece of art. And as always, I'm going to do my best to touch on not just the materials and techniques, how I make the work, but why. My general approach and thinking regarding the subject matter, and just anything I can think of that you as an artist or an art lover might find interesting or useful. Last year, I found myself remembering these little Cracker Jack toys from my childhood, and I don't have any of those from when I was a kid. But I went on eBay and I picked up this bag of vintage trinkets, and it was really fun to get these and look through them. And I got a little thrill, finding some of these toys that I'd played with as a kid and had totally forgotten. I picked out a handful, and ones I really liked that I thought looked good and reminded me of, those sentimental times. From the beginning, I had in my mind this idea that I would work some of these little trinkets into larger paintings, hide them in scenes and things like that. But I also wanted to select a few and do almost like portraits of them, a series of paintings of individual objects. I took a whole bunch of photos that I could use for reference, and this is the one that I decided to paint first. It's really interesting to me that this little trinket was made of plastic, but it looked like metal. And I thought it would be a neat challenge to try to capture that texture and paint that material. So I'm working on a wood panel here that's been pre-gessoed and sanded, and I have a cutout of the photograph I took of the trinket that I'm going to be painting. Just trying to capture the silhouette of that so that I can start working on the background, and I don't really want to have to try to draw that shape on top of a really busy background. And the reason the background's busy is because I'm more and more these days painting abstract backgrounds behind realistic objects. I like to hide things in the backgrounds. Something that interests me is, putting things in the painting that might surprise and delight someone if they view it more than once and find something that they didn't see before. I think that's just a really neat thing to do, and I always enjoy that when I view art. Using acrylic paint again, and I'm also trying to practice a new technique, which is basically painting the background in black and white, and then I'm going to end up toning it with a transparent acrylic paint later. It turned out really good. I think I learned a lot doing that, and it's something that I'm going to be using a lot more, I think, in future paintings. So yeah, if you've seen some of my earlier videos, you know that I like to paint abstract faces. This one is a little more chaotic probably than some of the ones I've done in the past, but there are faces in there. If you look hard enough, I think you can probably find a few, but I'm not trying to dictate too much like the subject matter for as far as the background is concerned. I'm just trying to paint something that's interesting and different, a little bit unique. If people see the faces or don't see the faces, that's fine. Some of them are obviously easier, I think, to see than others. This is another tip I have, which I don't ever do, which is I always forget to paint the edges of my canvases and wood panels, almost always. I used to do it. I used to be much better about painting them before I started, the actual painting. But these days it seems like I forget. I get so excited to get started, I just jump right in and then end up having to paint those later. But at this point, it was not a big deal. So here you can see this is me using a transparent quinacridone nickel azo gold, I believe that's a mouthful, but using that to sort of tone the whole background. And I'll end up, I think, doing a few more layers. I always like to show mistakes and things that I do that, just keeping it real. You can see here that I kind of forgot to paint the background in some of the areas where there were holes in the trinket. It's an easy enough thing to just go back and to fill in. So now I'm going to start painting the actual trinket, and I'm just going to put down sort of a medium gray and just fill in all the areas. And now that I've gotten that solid sort of block in, I'm going to use Seural tracing paper. Seural transfer paper. It comes in both black and also white, and I'm using the white Seural paper here to basically trace over my photograph and just get the basic lines of the object onto the panel. I know some people might frown at that, and I get it. I'm also using workable fixative to hold that transfer in place so that it doesn't smear around and get all messy when I'm trying to paint it. Some people might frown at that and say, well, that feels like cheating, but at this point in my quote-unquote career, if you will, I use every tip and trick I can to make the work to make it easier. Sometimes I do paintings where I just paint completely without any tools or mechanisms for transferring or tracing or anything like that. I just draw what I see as best I can, and I enjoy that. I love doing that. But in this case, this exercise for me was more about trying to paint something that looked like the material I was trying to paint, right? This metallic look, although it was a plastic toy, and less about trying to capture proportions without any help. I make up a lot of this stuff as I go along, to be honest. I just I really do paint things and just try to work them until they look good. And in this instance here, I started with this gray background, and an easy way for me to start from there is to paint either the darkest or the lightest colors. Usually the darkest colors for me seem to work better, so I'm going in with an almost black here. It's a very, very dark gray, I believe. And you've probably seen me or heard me talk about this probably in my other videos as well, but I'm loving this technique of putting down some paint with one brush and then blurring it with a second brush. And with the acrylic paint, you have to work pretty fast to do that. Sometimes I will mix in some slow dry gel, which helps a little bit, but it doesn't slow it down like to the point where it stays open like oil, for sure. I almost feel like with oil paint, I would have to start over, honestly, to learn how to paint that with that stuff, because it just stays wet for so long. But I have some, and I've painted with it before, and I'm gonna probably pick it up and do it again someday. Now I'm working in, I've obviously gone from dark to light, and I'm starting to work on some of the lighter areas. And to be honest, this is just a lot of trial and error and a lot of just having fun, like just putting down some paint and doing my best to try to capture what I see. And I've probably mentioned this in other videos before. You've probably heard this in a lot of other art videos, but there's always a point in the painting where you just have to trust the process, and you just have to say, you know what, this is going to end up being good. It's going to look awesome, or at least it's going to be better than what it looks like right now. And I think this is probably that point for me in this painting where it's starting to look like something, but it's also a little bit rough, right? And I'm kind of doubting myself, and I'm saying, okay, you know what? I think it's going to be okay. We just need to keep pushing forward and push on through this, and it's going to all work out. Another thing that comes to mind is that I used to almost paint hoping I would get something right. I know that might seem a little odd, but it's kind of like this idea of, funny enough, Nick Saban quoted a Nick Saban quote I heard not too long ago that was something like, you don't practice to get it right, you practice until you can't get it wrong. And I think that actually applies to painting as well. I used to paint with this mindset that I hope I could fumble my way into getting something to look good, and then got really nervous about don't mess it up, right? And now I'm sort of in a new place where I don't fear messing things up. I just trust that the more I work on them and the more I practice, the more comfortable I'm going to get, and the more I'm going to be able to replicate the results. And I think that if you paint with fear, you really are limiting yourself. And I think that we probably all have to go through that and get to a point where we just let go and we just kind of trust the process and sort of let the work unfold. So yeah, here we've probably passed that point of worrying and feeling pretty good about where this is headed. And from this point on, it's just detail work, right? It's just continue to find little things and see if I can improve them, looking at it, taking a step back, just continuing to push it as far as I can. And probably pushing it too far, honestly. I think that a lot of times there's a point where I could just stop and it would be fine, but in my mind I just have to keep going until I feel super confident that I've given it all I had, and that working on it more is either not going to make it any better or it's going to make it worse. So it's hard to see in a painting like this with time lapse, like all the little nuanced things that I'm doing here, but I'm essentially just looking for any tiny thing that feels like it could be a little bit better, right? A little bit darker here, a little bit lighter there, a little more texture or whatnot. And I wanted to keep this in because I want people to see, just every brushstroke, basically, like all the work that went into making this. Now, does that mean it would have, did it needed all this? I don't know. This is just what I did to make this piece. You may or may not have noticed that in the trinket itself, the cowboy figure was missing an arm, or at least the arm looked like it was, short or missing a piece or something. And so I decided to extend his arm and give him a hat, like holding a hat, like he's, just casually riding this bucking bronco with a, holding onto a hat. So part of me wanted to keep the figure flawed and leave the hat missing. But, I think you have to make those calls sometimes, whether to change the subject and, evolve it, I guess, in a way, or leave it as is. And I don't think there's a wrong way to go, right? It's just a personal choice. So one thing I also want to mention is that I added in some shadows like around the edges of the trinket to make it feel, pop off a little more from the background. And I think that really helped to bring in some realism to the piece. So yeah, from here on out, I'm basically continuing what I already said I was going to do, which is just tons and tons of details. And I probably waited too late in the video to mention this, but for me, it's really important at this point in my approach to art that I work on things that hold my interest. I can work on things just playing around with paint and painting something just because it's there, but the results are often much better for me when I pick something that I care about or something that just excites me and gives me joy. And that's why I chose to paint these trinkets, or purchase these trinkets and start painting them. And it worked, right? I think that the work turned out much better because there's a lot of detail here, and it took, probably not as long as it maybe seemed, but it definitely took a commitment to see it through and just to continue to work the piece. And I don't think I would have been able to make a successful painting if it was something that I didn't really care too much about, if that makes any sense at all. Another thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up is, if this is the kind of content you like, please let me know. Or if there are specific questions that you'd like me to focus on or try to cover in future videos, please let me know in the comments, especially if you've made it this far. You're somebody who's really interested in this kind of thing. I want to, try to make content that works for you or that you enjoy. So here I'm just touching up the borders of the piece again, and I end up varnishing it. I do an isolation coat actually first, and then I hit it with I think a glossy varnish in this case. And actually I can't remember if I did a satin or a gloss varnish, but I varnished the piece, and this work ended up being in a show at the Rec Gallery for pop art, and it was up for a month. And the little elephant is another piece that I did there, and I got to see some good friends at the show. And then I ended up taking the piece over to an antique shop that I also sell work in. And I'm just super excited with the way it turned out, and I'm excited to work on more pieces similar to this one. Please let me know what you thought. Again, anything you'd like me to cover in the future. Hope this helps you in some way. Have a great day. Peace.